We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. We'll start this meeting. First of all, are there any substitutes nominated for this meeting? Not seeing any.
No, Chair, there are no substitutes. Everybody's present.
Thank you. Remind members to declare an interest as and when necessary. It's not recommended that the public be excluded for any part of the meeting. And we'll move on to 4 now, the minutes of the Audit Committee on the 15th of February. Is anybody any comments they want to raise on that? So I'll move them as a true and correct record then. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. All in favour of that? Thank you. So we'll then move on to the member selected audit report. Markets, who's going to lead on this one?
Sorry, so thank you. I'll take this one, Chair. The member selected report was about the market service. The service has clearly been affected by the pandemic, and the audit was undertaken partly during the pandemic, and we're very grateful for the service for the cooperation we received at what was no doubt a very difficult time for the service and everybody else. The audit covered a wide range of issues, from financial and non-financial policies and procedures, governance and value for money. Overall, the opinion was considered to be adequate, but there were quite a few recommendations for improvement as detailed in the report. However, it is pleasing to note from the responses received at the time of the follow-up that most of the recommendations have been implemented, and for the few that haven't, progress was being made. Upon receipt of the follow-up return, the audit opinion was reviewed and upgraded to sound. Alan Lee, the corporate lead for CAFM, and John Walker, the markets manager, are in attendance and will be willing to answer any questions that members may have.
Right. Are there any questions from members? Yes, James.
Thank you, Chair. So I would have thought in some ways within the pandemic, with the markets not being open for a large period, actually provided quite a handy period to think about some of the processes and admin and stuff. Was there anything that we're still waiting to do till they get, now they kind of, things are getting back opened up, that it wasn't able to be implemented, that you're still yet working on? John?
Well, unfortunately, the markets didn't close, but we were still working on things, Councillor Baker. So during the course of this, we have now transitioned all traders cashless. So they all now pay us in a cashless manner. And we have now transitioned 60% of all open market traders cashless. So they all pay direct into the council's bank account via card machines, etc. So we are implementing a digital infrastructure to replace what I would class to an extent as an archaic manual paper-based system.
Hey, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the appendix, Lachlan, I see on item 5 it refers to discrepancies identified between receipts and the Market Hall spreadsheet. So you're saying that it should be investigated. I'm just wondering what the extent of these discrepancies are, and for how long they've been ongoing, and just a little bit more about it, please. Thank you.
Yeah, from discussions with the service, the discrepancies weren't found to create great concern. It was clerical error rather than any concern about fraud or loss of income. So I think part of the problem was to do with the undertaking the audit during the pandemic and not being able to get answers to questions at the time. So we had to put the recommendation in, and things have been dealt with since then to our satisfaction.
Thank you. Chair, I would just make the point that quite recently we heard about significant discrepancies on collection of money that, for all the right reasons, wasn't being followed properly. People were not recharging certain costs. I'm sure everybody will remember. But here's another report with discrepancies having been found. And I hope that, I'm sure we all hope, this isn't the start of some kind of a trend that we'll be hearing regularly, because it's worrying. Thank you.
Is there any answer to that at all, or comment? Right. And any other questions or observations from members? Yes, James.
Yeah, so just one more on the tenancy agreements. Has everyone got a tenancy agreement in place now? Because, you know, in the report it was saying about 20% of holders not having an agreement. Is that now sorted, and can we say that 100% of people have got a proper tenancy agreement?
We can't, I'm afraid. This has been long-standing negotiations with the two tenants associations. I am quite pleased to advise members that we have now got a way forward. A lot of this was withheld because of the costs of issuing those legal agreements. We've now got agreements with the one tenants association to implement a new legal agreement across top-of markets, and that will then slowly be introduced into Halifax, with no regard then for further court cases, etc., in regards to rental agreements, etc. So we tidied it all up, and there is progress being made.
Any other comments or observations? I was going to raise a similar point to that on just on 7.1. The management responses, etc., have been they're just a blank. You know, they've been crossed out. Is there any reason for that? That's in the action plan. Sorry, 7.1 of the action plan. They've all been redacted.
Yeah, it was felt that there was too much personal information in the response provided by the service chair. That's why the information was redacted.
Yeah, fine. Nigel, do you want to say something?
Yes, it was just in terms of Councillor Lee's question. As he quite rightly says, there's been a couple of audit reports that identified discrepancies in regards of income. Hopefully those are kind of exceptions, and we've got proper controls in place across the council. Clearly, if there are any other areas that we have concerns over, that internal audit have any concerns over, they will be reported to audit committee. But as I say, there are proper controls in place across the council and all services that generate income about the processes that are in place to make sure that that income is reconciled properly.
Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too, Stephen, saw what I now realise is redacted comments there. I thought maybe they'd not been made yet, the comments, but it's apparent that there have been. And I don't know how we do it, but I want to know about redacted comments. I want to know what's going on. And if it's personal, perhaps we can take some personal stuff out of it, but we need to get a grip on this. I'm not happy about it. We're hearing about discrepancies. We're hearing about systems that are in place now, but that were not there before. And we've got redacted comments in the report. And, you know, we're all familiar with receiving confidential information. And I want to look a lot more closely at this. And I think that's my duty to wish for that as a member of this audit committee. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comments?
If I could come in there, Chair. the decision was made to redact the comments, the management response on that, just one particular recommendation, because of the nature of the response and because it's a public meeting. I will liaise with the head of legal to see if we can circulate that report to members so they can see the comments made in the management response.
Thanks for that, Lisa. James.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've just copied and pasted the supposedly redacted part of a PDF, and you can see all the text if you copy and paste it into a plain text document, because it hasn't been properly redacted. Someone has just put like a black highlighter marker over the text, which is a pretty ambitious way of redacting a comment. So if you just cut and paste it, it's there. So it's actually in the public domain already now. If you just cut and paste it, you'll be able to look at it. It's a lesson. I mean, the Home Office, when I worked for the Notor ID campaign, I did a FOI once to the Home Office, and they accidentally did this, and they sent me a PDF with supposedly redacted comments in it, which devolves a load of kind of confidential Home Office material, and it led to a review of how the Home Office actually redacts its documents. So perhaps there's a lesson to be learned there about how to redact stuff if you want to do that.
Right. Any more comments from members of the committee? No. Sylvia, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it's unfortunate if somebody hasn't completely redacted that, and obviously people will be reminded of the need to properly redact PDFs. But I think, in fact, John has actually given you the substance of the response to that, if I'm not mistaken, in saying that all contracts are now being upgraded to the new ones. So whilst it's not the substance of the response may have been redacted, you have heard it verbally, if I understood right. And yes, we appreciate that we don't want any form of discrepancies at the council, but Councillor Lee referred to two incidents, the one here and the one in relation to claiming payments from the CCG. And I would say that they are very different kinds of issues. One we're told here today, and I accept what I'm told, which is effectively there's no loss, it's a clerical error, whereas the other one was one where we weren't claiming all that we could claim, and therefore the council was potentially losing on money. So they're very different kinds of issues, but nevertheless, clearly both have been recognised and steps have now been taken to ensure that that doesn't happen again in either case. And as Nigel Broadbent has said, as a rule across the council, there are processes in place to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen.
Thank you. Jane.
Chair, so I've just read the passage.
No, James, it's Jane had her hand up first.
Oh, Jane, sorry, I thought you said James. Sorry, I said Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, James.
You've frozen, Jane. Jane, do you want to make your comments, James, whilst Jane is frozen?
Yeah, I mean, I've just read that passage that is supposedly redacted, and it doesn't contain any personal information about any individual in it at all. So I'd like to know really why, as a member of the Audit Committee, I was just told that was the reason it was redacted, and that's not the case. It's concerning the issue with the tenancy agreements and the dispute over getting those sorted. It doesn't mention a single individual. Yeah, as a member of the Audit Committee of this council, I was just misinformed as to the reason it was redacted, and that to me is a grave concern.
Well, I think we've been told that it's going to be circulated to us when we've all seen it, and we can then make possibly a more informed decision and actually bring it back to the next meeting if people seem fit. So I hope that is acceptable. Jane, we lost you.
Yes, I was cut off in my prime, and I'm sitting right next to the router, so I can't explain it. I just wanted to say that there has been such an extraordinary shift, and credit to the market services in terms of assisting traders in making that shift from cash to digital. And we will see more of that transformation and change going on. And members are absolutely right. We need to keep an eye on that as we have dual systems in terms of cash and digital. But I really do pay credit to the market support staff in terms of just making sure that things continue to work during the pandemic. Thank you, Chair, and apologies.
Right, thank you. Any further comments? I know James has made a comment which people can refer to if they wish. Okay, right. We'll move on to the next thing. Well, we could make a note that we note the report. Is everybody happy with that?
Yeah, I think we should. Well, I'd like us to note the report and have it come back so we can discuss the full content of it. And I'd also like an explanation in writing, please, as to why I was informed that this section contained personal information when it didn't.
Well, as I said, James, once we've had a look, I've made that point already, that once we've had a look at it, the committee itself will decide whether we want it back or not.
Thank you,
That's
Chair.
okay, right? Thank you. So we'll move on now to, well, is everybody happy to note that report? I assume so, yeah, thank you. Move on to the audit next, item 6, Audit Committee Annual Report. This has been circulated to everyone. I'm sure you've all read it. So are there any comments regarding it? Any observations? Right, well, I'll just thank Lisa for the work she's put into this. It does take a lot of work to go through all this, so thank you, Lisa. And I sort of move that we accept the annual report and forward it to the next full council meeting. Are we all in favour of that?
Chair.
Sorry, yeah. Right, thank you. Move on to 7, the annual report on risk management. Martin, I assume you're going to do this one.
Sorry, it was muted. Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Yes, I'm presenting on this one. Yes, 2021 has been a challenging year for risk as the UK finally left the EU with a deal in place, which has mitigated some of the potential risks arising from leaving the EU. Although, as highlighted in the report, some risks will continue to require monitoring into the future. However, the overwhelming risk impact for 2021 has been the continued COVID pandemic and managing the risks of business continuity and how the council continues to deliver services in the face of 2 lockdowns in the TS system while ensuring the well-being of staff and service users. I continue to work with officers across the authority on the transformation of services and on major projects, and also with directorates to mitigate the impact of directorate risks faced by the council. Looking forward to 2021, one of the less obvious impacts of the pandemic has been the pausing of staff training and the staff and member risk workshops. The People Development Programme will restart from June 2021 to deliver the risk awareness, tolerance and appetite workshops. Why is risk training important? I was reading a newspaper from today in January 2020 itself, and it was reporting at that time that there have been 17 deaths and 550 infections across 6 countries as part of what became the COVID pandemic. However, the World Health Organization was undecided whether it should be a global health emergency, and flights from Wuhan were still landing at Heathrow, where passengers were given a leaflet advising them if they felt ill to seek medical help. With hindsight, it's easy to identify the potential risks which would impact across the world. And a key part of this council's risk management training is encouraging staff to look at their own services to identify any potential risks which may have arisen as a consequence of the pandemic, as well as the impacts of the pandemic on the mitigation of existing risks. The insurance process within the council provides an opinion on the strength of the government arrangements. This is reinforced by talking with other authorities to identify if we're delivering best practice. In the report, reference is made to a ZIPFA webinar attended by a number of local authorities, including the reporting of strategic risks and risk registers to audit committees. Following the discussion, the individual reporting of risks as carried out by Calderdale was seen to give a good practice and something that other authorities would like to include as part of their risk reporting. So there obviously is something of good practice which we're carrying out and which other people also see as good practice. Risk management continues to be a vitally important part of service delivery as the council recovers from the impacts of the COVID pandemic. And there's obviously, we continue to manage the changing risk environment which has been brought about by the pandemic, and working both within the council and other organisations as appropriate to keep at the forefront of risk management. Thank you very much. Are there any questions, please?
Anybody, any questions of Martin? No, you've been let off light this evening, Martin. But thanks very much for the report. And I move that we note the report. If we're all in favour of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Move on to the certification of claims and returns annual report. Is this Richard or Hassan who's going to deal with this one? Richard, you're
please, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report that we delivered to the Audit Committee outlining the certification work we've done. So the key work we do in addition to signing the annual financial statements. There are two main claims which are outlined in section 1 and 2 of the report. The biggest one is your housing benefits subsidy claim, which we report on to DWP following the assurance process that DWP set out. Pleased to report that there were not a great many errors this year, and in terms of the overall value of the claim, that didn't change from the work we did. We had to carry out some extended testing due to some errors we found. That's in line with our expectation and thus had no impact on the fee. We reported to DWP in April our findings and our extrapolations, but the overall volume of them was within the limit the council has to stick to for errors of classification of overpayments. The original deadline was extended to January because of COVID, but as you're well aware, the audit of the accounts hadn't completed, and the two are interlinked because the benefits amounts are such high figures in the financial statements. But we negotiated with DWP and kept them informed of the progress, and they have received that report. The other piece of assurance work we carry out for you is in section 2, is the teachers' pensions return that we do on an annual basis. That's sent to the Teachers' Pensions Authority. We carry out agreed procedures on that are set by the authority, and our report again to that. Once we'd completed the audit of the financial statements, we were able to use the information we'd already tested there in terms of the payroll as our base, and do the additional testing we're required to do for that return. And again, very pleased to report we didn't have to make any amendments to the values within that claim, and we were able to certify that. Section 3 of the report sets out the fees we charged you for the 2019-20 audits of those returns for the information up to March 2020, which we then certify once that's been submitted. And again, there were no changes to the fees that we outlined in our initial audit plan and in our engagement letters, because we didn't have to carry out excessive additional work. And the eagle-eyed may spot there was reference to a section 4 of upcoming changes. When I first drafted this report in February, DWP set out that the requirements for 2021 housing benefits work were not significantly changed, so that bit was no longer relevant. At the time, we were unsure what the differences would be, but they published that in February, so there's nothing additional to add. Happy to take any questions on that report.
Are there any questions or observations from anyone? Yes, Stephen.
Just a question about findings in relation to 2019-20. This was a number of cells understated and overstated. I realise that there's no real difference. I think it's £16 you said, but
Yeah.
I just wonder, any comments about if we're using this data to manage our affairs, it needs to be correct. And all credit to you for finding these discrepancies, which came back to not very much. I just question how are we running our affairs if these various cells were incorrect in themselves? You know, people are using this information to manage what's going on. So how on earth have we managed to do that when a number of them, looks like most of them, were actually incorrect in these various cells? Thank you.
If I can, Chair. The housing benefit return, as you can see by references to cells, 114, is a few hundred items long, and the way it is split is by the type of subsidy that's being granted. So the amount of expenditure was recorded correctly. As I've noted, all these items relate to just one property, which is a temporary accommodation property with multiple rooms that had been just tagged as what's known as rent allowance, rather than where the landlord is paid. So it's purely moving them from one section to the other. The property is, and the individual claims within that property are correct within the system. It's just allocating it to the right line within the claim, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Chair, what I would also add in response, just following up from Richard's response there, is that I would say it's not unusual for us to identify errors when we're undertaking work on the housing benefit return at other local authorities as well. So it is fairly common. And unlike the audit which we undertake on your financial statements, we don't work to a materiality level for our audit of housing benefits. So we're required in line with the certification instructions to report findings at whatever level we identify them. So hence you see some findings, some differences there, which are in the pounds and the pence, which we wouldn't be reporting if in our audit of your financial statements in terms of materiality.
Thank you, Hassan. Any other comments or observations? Yes, James.
Thank you, Joe. Just to comment on the value for money section on the significant risk of securing the financial resilience, just to note that the balance and reserve there is low, and we are reliant still on finding a significant amount of savings in the medium term financial strategy. And I think it would be good to have some clarity as soon as possible, really, as to what any other future savings are, so that they can be planned and start to be worked up into the council processes. Because whilst it, as it remains unknown, it's still a risk there moving forward, isn't it?
I think that's item 9, Chair. James.
Have I skipped forward an item? Sorry, I thought we were onto your report there. We're not onto that yet. It's always harder when it's all in one document, you see, rather than having the separate papers out in front of you.
Right, well, we'll accept this clarification on the certification of claims and reports and move on to item 9, the annual audit letter. If you want to, if you're dealing with, whoever's dealing with it can deal with James's comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly take you through the annual audit letter. So we've a responsibility under the NAO's Code of Audit Practice to issue an annual audit letter. Members would, in reading the report, will note that the issues summarised within the annual audit letter have already been communicated in our audit results report. So the audit results report we issue before we provide the opinion on our financial statements audit and the value for money conclusion work. The annual audit letter we have to issue after we've given the opinion, hence the difference between the two. So the annual audit letter communicates that we did issue an unqualified opinion on the council's financial statements and an unqualified value for money conclusion. And as has been commented in communicating our audit results report, we did highlight issues in terms of financial sustainability, which the council may wish to keep an eye on in terms of the response to the points outlined there. Then maybe officers may wish to comment in terms of how that will be taken forward. As well as summarising the results of our audit, the annual audit letter also includes details of our fees, which again have been communicated in our audit results report. What is new in terms of fees is the element which relates to the additional work which we've undertaken, which we have outlined to management. Where fees are unagreed, then we'll look to put them forward to the PSA for determination. Happy to take any other questions.
Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. I'm just interested. You mentioned you did have a comment that you put forward about financial sustainability, and you didn't give any indication of what that comment might be, nor any values that might be involved in that. So it immediately begs the question, what were those comments? I'd like to know, please.
Sure. So apologies there. So on page 18 of our report within the value for money section, so we highlight in page 14 the significant risk that we'd identified at the planning stage, provide a commentary there in terms of what that risk was, and we provide a conclusion, what our conclusion was based on the work which we undertook. So this has already been communicated previously in our audit results report. We set out the context there in terms of the issues facing the council, highlighting the medium-term challenges, and we outline the last sentence that the council continues to appropriately plan, monitor and report on the financial position, and that the identification and monitoring of those savings would need to be continued going forward. So that's the comment which I was referring to.
Yes, Nigel.
It's just picking up on the same point in terms of financial sustainability or resilience. I think there's later on the agenda on the work programme actually has suggested bringing a report back to Audit Committee to the July meeting on financial resilience, which will then bring in the information about reserves in the outturn figures for 2020-21. So that will provide that information about the overall level of reserves and also some of the other resilience issues that are mentioned in the report. In terms of one of the other key risks about savings to the council moving forward in future years, I'm not sure that will be any clearer by July, because it will be determined partly by the Chancellor's spending review, which I assume will be later in the year than that. But clearly, if there's anything changes between now and the next Audit Committee, we will let members know. But as I say, the intention is to bring an update on financial resilience and a presentation to the next meeting.
Thank you. Any other comments or observations? But, thanks for that, Shane. So move on to item 10, the Code of Corporate Governance. Lisa, are you dealing with this?
I am, Chair, thank you. This is just a verbal update to confirm that the local Code of Corporate Governance has been reviewed, and as members have previously agreed, where the housekeeping changes, there isn't a need to bring the full code of corporate governance to the meeting, and that is the case for this year. We do propose to do a thorough review of the code in the current financial year, in particular looking at governance arrangements as a result of COVID. So I would anticipate that the revised code of corporate governance will come to the meeting next year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? No, so I assume that we're all happy with that. So let's move on to internal audit report and opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Yep.
I'll take this one. I don't intend to go through the entire report, just run through some highlights. The report's been prepared in compliance with the Accounts and Audit Regulations and Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. Section 5 of the report details the work carried out by internal audit throughout 2021, the resources that have been used to carry out that work. At 5.7, it does detail the improvements that have been made to controls as a result of the audit work carried out in the year, which did result in formal audit reports. Just to draw your attention to the fact that in addition to audit reports and scheduled audit reviews where audit opinions and recommendations are issued to management, there are other planned and unplanned pieces of work which internal audit do, with the overall aim of also improving controls, improving efficiency and supporting the council to achieve its priorities. And section 5.12 onwards does detail some of that work, but I will draw your attention to some of the things that have been carried out in last financial year, which are perhaps a little bit different to previous years. Internal audit have been involved in making a video to be used in induction to make all new staff aware of the fraud arrangements in place within the council. We were investigated by the IPCO looking at our arrangements for RIPA. They identified that all previous recommendations had been implemented and there were no further recommendations made, and Calderdale were found to be fully compliant. There are things planned for the current financial year, like a new IT security group, which has been developed, which will include colleagues from ICT in addition to our senior auditor. Just to assure members that all findings from audit reports, investigations, other pieces of work collectively are looked at to identify whether there are any emerging trends or potential risks, and that actually is used to inform future audit work. The audit plan report is an item on the agenda later, and those things are considered in developing that. Section 6 talks about the effectiveness of the system of internal control. As members have been made aware throughout the year, internal audit coverage in the last financial year was significantly different to what was planned at the beginning of the year. But despite that, an opinion can be given on controls in place. The report also identifies the local performance indicators which are in place, which compares the results from 2021 to the previous year, which I can answer further questions on if members have any questions. In addition, the internal audit plan report does accompany a new internal audit charter this year, and there will be an internal audit strategy which is on the agenda to be brought to a future audit committee meeting. Finally, section 7, well, not finally, the penultimate section is section 7, which talks about the annual governance statement and the work which has been carried out throughout the year in order to provide assurance on, and that's detailed in 7.5 of the report. You'll note that the overall opinion from corporate leads was adequate. And although 3 corporate leads viewed a deterioration from strong to adequate, there's no significant issues and there are no areas which were regarded as weak. In addition, for last year, we also requested directors to provide an assurance statement. They weren't asked to provide an overall opinion, just a statement regarding governance arrangements within their sphere of responsibility. Similarly, no significant issues were identified from these statements, although there were some areas of improvement which will be revisited by internal audit as part of arrangements for 21-22. And the statements from corporate leads also included some statements aimed at improving controls. And we will be giving feedback to corporate leads to ensure that this action is taken. So the final section of the report is my opinion on controls in place. And 8.1 details the assurance that I can give on that. And I do detail some items in that section which I believe should be included in the annual governance statement for 2021. That isn't on tonight's agenda due to the changing dates for preparing the statement of accounts and the annual governance statement, but that section will be expanded in the annual governance statement. Just to confirm that I've got no qualifications on the opinion. So unless members have any questions, I'd ask that the recommendations be considered, which are outlined in section 3 of the report.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Lisa, for that comprehensive report. I'm just concerned about one of your comments then about 3 of the corporate leads volunteering that they had some concerns about things. And I accept that, you know, that they're not, they won't be serious, otherwise you would have highlighted them. But I just wondered whether our general systems allow for reservations or comments like that to be made during the course of the year, rather than making them at the end of the year. Because if there was more meat in those concerns, we could address problems earlier if that opportunity was given to those corporate leads. Any comment, please, on that, Lisa?
We do reviews throughout the year. So if there were any issues emerging as part of the audits and the reviews we were doing, they would certainly be addressed as an ongoing thing. This isn't something that we just do at the end of the year and tick it, move on and don't do it again for another 12 months. The statements that corporate leads provide are a reflection on the previous 12 months. And I think some of the deterioration in controls from what was previously strong to adequate is sort of that air of caution. And because in particular things like training hasn't happened in the same way as it might have done in previous years because of COVID. So if there's a commonality, it's lack of training or a reduced amount of training in some of those governance areas. So it's not a matter of concern. They've flagged it up. They're addressing it. They've got training programs in place for the coming year, but certainly they would be picked up if there was anything serious emerging from reviews, etc.
Thank you for that. Just one further comment on training. As we know, we've been working mainly from home during the last year for very good reasons, and there are plans for people to continue to work from home. Will that have an impact on our ability to do the sort of training that is necessary frequently in training sessions? People bounce off one another. Will that affect our ability? Is there a risk there that we won't be able to train maybe as we have in the past?
Different options will be looked at in terms of training, and different delivery models looked at to try and ensure that there is still a robust programme in place for training. As part of my presentation, I did highlight the fact that internal audit had been involved in providing some videos as part of an induction for new staff. So certainly new ways of communicating with people. has already been considered, and that was one of them. I appreciate that that face-to-face and being able to bounce ideas off is an important element. So some things have been done remotely, but I'm sure that there will be an opportunity for staff to come together when the time is right to actually meet safely in council buildings to be trained as appropriate. But I think the answer is there'll be a wide range of different options available.
Thank you.
Nigel, did you have a comment to make?
Yes, it was just in response to Councillor Lee's query, and just to give you a bit more reassurance that, just as an example, that I'm the corporate lead for value for money. Clearly, if there were any issues around value for money that I thought were appropriate to raise with the audit committee or internally within the organisation, I wouldn't wait until year end to do that. I would do it during the course of the year, and that's part of my responsibility as a Section 151 officer anyway. So just to give some extra reassurance if it's required, that as I say, I would do that during the course of the year, not wait until whenever it was on the agenda.
Thank you. James.
Thanks. I do think the kind of governance side of things is something we need to always remain constantly vigilant on, and part of our job as an audit committee is not be afraid to shy away from those kind of difficult and sometimes awkward questions to ask. On that final bit where you've got that kind of spider diagram, there's a lot of yellow on there of things and the overall opinion of adequate. One of those areas, equality and diversity, is something I'm going to try and raise on governance and business around how we look at the Equalities Act obligations and things like equalities impact assessments going alongside cabinet reports. I think that would really help strengthen some of our governance and kind of framework when it comes to ensuring we comply with the Equalities Act. Other things, I mean, you sometimes see things slip in a little bit in how things are done within the authority at the moment. For example, this meeting, we're holding it online, whereas under the Coronavirus Act 2020, the powers to do that expired on 7th of May. So I was just looking now so I think that actually means we can't actually make any legal decisions as an audit committee tonight. We can only kind of note things or make notifications because we're not meeting in person. So if we were actually to make a decision as an audit committee or recommendation, it wouldn't actually be legal because we hadn't met in person. So that's one example of where, like, the governance of these things is kind of slipping, in my opinion, slipping a little bit on the authority, and something we need to be a bit mindful of and just kind of up our game. And I'm not, sometimes I feel like I'm being difficult when I say things like that, and I'm not doing it to try and cause problems. I'm doing it because it's, my responsibility as a member of the audit committee to say those things. It's sometimes a bit difficult, but I do think it's an area where we get back into coming out of coronavirus. It's been a difficult period. We've been working from home. I do think there's a need to really kind of up our game in some of this stuff and start getting it right again, because I do start to see mistakes slipping in here and there when it comes to this stuff. And I think that is kind of represented in some of this audit report when you look at the overall kind of comments from the corporate leads, and we're adequate now rather than strong overall.
Any comments regarding that? Sylvia, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Members that had to say. Well, yes, but I think the point being that in the case of this, I'd like to say that in the case of this particular meeting, that was not a mistake or a slip up or a reduction of standards that we had this meeting online. It was because the advice we received was that there were no legal decisions or no decisions or recommendations to be made. Therefore, it was acceptable to have it online. If there had been, then we would have all been in the council chamber in Halifax if it had been necessary. So I simply don't accept that that's somehow a slipping of standards or in that way. And I think also in relation to the suggestion that mistakes are slipping in, again, you've just had it explained that the reason the CLT were making this assessment of adequate was related to training and the fact that at the moment that training had been difficult. And so it's not mistake slipping in, it's the fact of a pandemic. And the point that I'd originally been going to make was Councillor Lee had asked about the fact that you don't get that kind of informal discussion when you're having online training. And one of the things that I hope will happen as time goes on is that staff will be able to make more use of things like Yammer, which I haven't managed to get my head around, but my understanding of it is much more a provision where there can be that sort of chat. And as time goes on, people will find it as natural to learn that way as they used to by standing at the back of the room with a cup of coffee in the hand. So even though things may never entirely revert to how they were, I think people will adapt. And we've seen during the pandemic just how well people can adapt to things. So I think that next year, that training issue will have gone away because circumstances will have changed and people will have adapted. Thank you.
Yes, James.
I mean, I just want to come back. I mean, I'm in a meeting now. If you look at the agenda of the meeting, it says venue council chamber, yet clearly we're not in the council chamber. You know, that to me would be an example of where the advice we've got from legal is not in line with my interpretation of the Local Government Act and what has changed with the coronavirus regulations after we were told we had to meet in person after the 7th of May. And the advice is that as long as we don't make any legal decisions, that's fine to have it online. But until it's not a proper meeting under the Local Government Act if the summons says that you're meeting in one place and then you're meeting online, and that for me is an example of standards slipping in terms of what is the proper thing. So I mean, I just think that is a concern for me, and you know, I'd like to have that concern just minuted on the minutes of this meeting.
Jane, do you want to comment?
Chair, I was just going to perhaps mention that we are talking about the value for money and the opinion in relation to internal audit here, rather than the whole council. And perhaps Councillor Baker's points can be, as he said, picked up and discussed in another forum, because I don't think that we are at this point addressing a criticism of internal audit, unless I've misunderstood Councillor Baker's comments about this report, which is about the value for money and the competency and the adequacy of internal audit. And I don't think, I mean, we may have a longer debate about governance elsewhere and the current arrangements because of the pandemic. I don't think that's necessarily specific related to this item in relation to internal audit. I wouldn't like internal audit staff here to think that we were criticising their arrangements at this precise moment.
And I would just just pointed out that the agenda was changed and uploaded onto the council website prior to this meeting starting.
Okay, right. Well, the summons I was sent. So anyway, I mean, I was commenting just kind of for clarification. It's Appendix 3. It's assurance statements and the corporate leads. So that's what I was commenting on.
Any other comments or observations? Right, I move that we approve the annual report, and I would say that we do confirm the effectiveness of our internal audit and indeed our finance department completely, because they are. I think that they've throughout my time on the council, they've always excelled in the duty that they put their duties in looking after the assets and of this council. So thank you for that. Are we all in favour of that? Anybody against? That's fine, thank you. So we're going to the Item 12 now, the COVID-related grants, risk and assurance. Is this you again, Lisa?
Nigel's going to speak to this one, Chair, so you don't have to listen to me again.
Are you having a deserved rest?
Yeah.
Nigel?
Thanks, Chair. I thought I'd give Lisa a breather, given the number of reports she's got on the agenda. Very briefly then, this report was prepared, I think, at a request at previous audit committee meeting about some further information on the risks involved on the COVID-related grants. The report focuses primarily on business grants, but makes reference to a whole host of other grants that the council's been responsible for distributing around, in particular around welfare schemes. So as I say, the report concentrates, however, on the largest elements in terms of monetary value, which have been the business grants. The report provides a summary of the controls and the assurance processes that are required and are in place in the council in regards to all the business grant schemes. I think in terms of some of the highlights, the most recent grants, such as the Restart business grants, we've been required as a council to collect a lot more information from businesses than the previous grants, and that's partly a reflection of the fact that there was a significant amount of fraud in terms of nationally, should I say, in terms of the business grant schemes. The report also kind of highlights the fact that most of the checking in terms of the business grant process is done up front. So on the face of it, it seems to suggest that 20% of the business grants were rejected, or business grant applications were rejected. I should highlight, though, or point out and stress that that doesn't mean that those applications were fraudulent. What it means is that a number of applications were unfortunately ineligible under the scheme criteria that are set down by government. Some of them were repeat applications where people have mistakenly made a number of applications, etc. So the report actually does highlight a very small amount of fraud that was discovered within our own schemes in Calderdale. So it gives some assurance about the processes that we've had in place over that time. I should say also that the council is responsible for the lawful use of the funds, the monies that the government gives us in terms of business grants to distribute and allocate. We're responsible for the financial administration of that, and in particular myself as Section 151 officer of the council. So we have to ensure that the grants that are distributed are given within the eligibility criteria that have been set down by government. Otherwise, you know, the council could be held liable for those particular grants. In terms of the controls that are in place, I'm sure Lisa can provide a lot more information about those if necessary. But hopefully the report gives some context to the risks involved in the business grant processes, and the criteria that we have to apply, and the level of scrutiny that we've given to that to give the kind of assurances that the government is looking for on all the business grant schemes and all the other welfare schemes that we run on their behalf.
Any questions or observations? Yes, James.
So in terms of these grants then across the local authority, and perhaps across West Yorkshire, have any of these cases where we recovered money where we thought it was fraudulent being reported on to the police, and has any action been taken across the, either this local authority area or region as a result of that from the police? Because if there's fraudulent cases going on, then they ought to be investigated, surely, as a criminal offence.
Lisa, do you want to come in on that one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not some of them are being investigated more regionally, and we have had confirmation back from NAFN that the intelligence that we provided is proving useful to them in carrying out those investigations, but I don't have any further information on them, just confirmation that it's been useful to them.
Any other questions?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say, what that is we have to report them And then if there are further investigation, including criminal investigations, those that will be carried out either locally if it was just a local event, but actually regionally if it was quite a wider problem with regard to particular applicants. So our responsibility is to report them in the first instance, but in terms of let's say police enforcement of that will follow on from that, and clearly we'll provide any information that we can to help that.
Okay,
yeah, sorry, it's perhaps just worth adding where it's local, we have taken steps to recover those grants. If it's either fraudulent or somebody's had a grant that wasn't eligible, we have taken action locally on those.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. It was a similar question to the one raised by Councillor Baker. Just looking at a couple of paragraphs 5.8 and 5.9 in the report, it refers to these potential frauds. And I noticed that Calderdale Council in 5.8 prevented 3 organised crime attempts. And so I would understand from Lisa's comments that those have been reported, if they're known to be organised crime attempts, to the value of 75,000. But then in 5.9, we talk about processes, and this is great, and I congratulate the whole team for this. Processes prevented payment of almost £18 million from the small business grants and retail. Now, given that those aren't the biggest grants around, that suggests a large number to have got to 18 million. And I just wonder how they have been categorised and what's happening about it. And my overall comment is that it's been widely reported in the media that nationally there's billions of pounds thought to have been fraudulently obtained during this, and it's a horrible thing to think that people would do that during these unfortunate circumstances. But presumably in that number, Calderdale will have been affected in the same way as every other local authority. So what's happening, about £18 million worth of processes that we prevented from going forward, because that represents a lot of claims and a lot of bad things going on. Thank you.
Nigel, do you?
Yeah, I'll try and answer that, and Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the figure of £18 million is, if you look at the data in the appendix in terms of the claims, the applications that were rejected, it's around £18 million. As I said before, that's not to suggest that those are all fraudulent applications, and hopefully very few of them will be. It was the emphasis I was trying to place on, because we have to put those processes in place up front and do all the checks that we do before we actually make any payments. Then in effect we've rejected £18 million worth of applications, which if we didn't have those processes in place, we could have made those payments. So it's, as I say, it's not to say that those were all fraudulent, and hopefully very few of them were, but as I say, the controls are in place that have prevented £18 million worth of applications being paid out that, if we hadn't have had those processes in place, could have been. So hopefully Lisa will confirm that that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or observations? All right. Well, I move that we note the report and the actions taken. Is everybody okay with that? Don't see anybody against, so I will move on to Audit Committee effectiveness.
Chair, I'll take this one again. Members will, well, since 2018, the Audit Committee have been carrying out self-assessments, which have included in the past senior officers as well. based on SIPFA guidance. The latest self-assessment was conducted in February. You'll recall we held a meeting prior to the last audit committee. I also circulated some good practice questions which were recommended by SIPFA. So I've included the responses to those questionnaires within the report, and I've proposed some enhancements based on the discussions that we had. They're laid out at 516 of the report, and subject to members agreeing that, I propose we use that to form an action plan moving forward that we can review and monitor throughout the year. The report also touches on the issue of the independent member. We discussed this on numerous occasions over the last few years, and members have agreed to have an independent member on the audit committee, and this has been approved by the Governance and Business Committee. However, we've been unsuccessful in appointing to that role, and the discussion we had in February was that we should perhaps consider the remuneration of an independent member. So I consulted with other West and South Yorkshire audit teams regarding their remuneration, and that's detailed in 5.2.2 of the report, which shows the highest remuneration, the lowest. Each local authority in there is that local authorities asked me not to publish that. And I've also included, just for information, the number of independent members those local authorities have. By far, most people have one independent member. So I'm happy to take any questions. If there aren't any questions, I'd ask members to consider the recommendations, to agree the areas for improvement, and for members to consider and agree an appropriate level of remuneration for independent members.
Are there any questions? No, it's I would just say that this has been going on for quite some time. We have struggled to try and get anybody interested in it, and whilst we were against remuneration to begin with, we did agree, as Lisa has pointed out in February, that we should look at this seriously. And I would suggest that we go for the £661, the lowest one paid at the moment, but give some leeway for Lisa and the team to look at possibly going up to £1,000 if people would be in agreement with that, because I think it's a question of trying to get somebody as soon as possible and not go through a stay, like this, and then have to wait to the next audit committee before they can go any further. So it just gives them that freedom to hopefully get somebody appointed sooner rather than later. If there's no comments about, yes, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. I agree with your basic suggestion. Had you not made the precise suggestion you made, I was going to suggest that we actually leave the decision entirely to Lisa and Nigel. The problem with this is, whilst never wishing to be profligate with other people's money, we do want to make sure that we get the right quality of person doing this. So I'm not advocating the top amount, nor necessarily the bottom amount. It'll just depend on who's available and the quality of the people that may put themselves forward. So, they're pretty tight anyway, these boundaries of what's paid. So I don't know, Stephen, whether you'd consider that we should leave it to them and see what they come back with, because it all depends who's interested in it. If nobody's interested, clearly we're not offering enough money.
Yeah, well, I think when you think about it, there are 6 audit meetings during the year, and that at the lowest one, that's over £100 per meeting, which I think is generous. But we've given them the upper gift by what I'm proposing, we're giving Nigel and Lisa the opportunity to go up to nearly £150 per meeting. So
Okay.
I think that is generous enough.
Okay.
But I'm a tight Yorkshireman. Are we all in favour of that? All right, and I'll move the recommendations at the same time, if that's okay with everybody. Right, thank you. So we go to the certification fee, my favourite topic. Is this you, Hassan, or is it Richard?
I'll take this one, Chair. So this, I think, relates to 21-22. It's said certification fees, which would be in respect of the housing benefits certification. We've yet to communicate a fee for 21-22. I have outlined to Nigel a fee for 2021, which is the work which we'd be doing towards the back end of this year in respect of the housing benefits certification. So that will be increasing from £16,000, which Richard outlined in the previous report, to £16,750. As I said, that's for the 2021 certification, but 21-22 would be undertaken in the back end of 2022.
Right, thank you. Any questions or observations? Right, well, it's do we have to formally agree this, or are we if we accept the thing, is everybody okay with that? Right, thank you. Move on to Internal Audit Services Annual Audit Plan. Lisa, is this you again?
Yes, it is. This is the report setting out the programme of work for 21-22, and it also includes the Internal Audit Charter, which I referred to earlier. I propose to do a new Internal Audit Charter each year, which will be presented along with the audit plan, which is how we propose to deliver the service throughout the year. The plan has been prepared taking into account council priorities and risks to enable an effective approach to identify priority areas, looking at the audit resources that we have and how they can be most usefully targeted. As members are aware, throughout 2021 there was an ongoing process to review the audit plan because of the COVID-19 pandemic, to ensure that we prioritise audits to enable sufficient audit coverage to be able to deliver an audit opinion, which the previous report identified that we could do, but also to be sufficiently flexible and fluid to respond to changing priorities. And that really is the way that the plan will be delivered throughout the current financial year, with this ongoing dialogue in order to continue approaching audits in an accommodating and fluid manner. 4.2.11 of the report details the considerations that have been given in formulating the audit plan, the processes that we went through, the people we discussed things with. 4.3.1 gives an overview of how it will be delivered in terms of the categories of audit work. You'll note at 4.3.2, I've stated that the above is actually in excess of the resources available currently. That's because of a couple of reasons: delays in the recruitment of new staff and some audits being deferred from last year. As a result, I have had detailed consultation with CLT and have prioritised all audits for the current financial year. So Appendix C does outline all the audits and the proposed priority for the year. So for members to ask any questions or to, as the recommendation states, to approve the plan and the charter, but happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from anybody? No, I can't see any hands, so I would, oh, sorry, Jane.
I may just have missed something being online. There was an Appendix A and Appendix C, but I didn't see an Appendix B. Was there something missing?
It's the Internal Audit Charter, I think.
Yes, that should be a separate PDF document.
As Councillor Baker said earlier, the difficulty of looking at things online is going to and fro. Apologies.
If for some reason members haven't received that, I can ensure that it's published and sent on to you.
Any other questions or observations? Right, well, I move that we approve the audit plan and charter. Is everybody in favour of that? Yeah, everybody seems to be in favour. Thank you. Move on to internal audit services. Lisa again.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual tracking report, which outlines to members the reports that have been conducted, the audit opinions and the progress in implementing audit recommendations. There's nothing to highlight. There are no new weak audit reports, no significant delays in responses from management. I'm happy to take suggestions for what members would like to see as a member suggested selected report for the next meeting.
On this, I was going to ask if members would be happy to consider the community asset transfers, because I know there are a number going through at the moment. Not many, is it sort of in single figures? I think it's about 4 or 5 that have actually been accepted today to it. I may be wrong there, but I think it's certainly a low figure. And I think it's an opportunity for us to look to see if the process is working and whether, you know, we are doing the right things. Would members be happy with that? Right, so we'll go for that then, the community asset transfers for the next meeting, and approve the tracking report if we're all in favour. Thank you. Next one is 17, is the value for money arrangements. Who's doing this one? Asana or Richard?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through this one. There are actually 2 papers for members' attention within this particular agenda item. So the first one is a summary which outlines changes to our value for money responsibilities, and the second one provides a summary from the Satoni Redmond review. So first of all, in respect of the value for money arrangements, the paper outlines, following the change in the Code of Audit Practice by the NAO, auditors now have some increases to our responsibilities in respect to value for money. So there are 3 criteria. So there were 3 criteria that we had to assess previously. The 3 criteria for this year now are in respect of financial sustainability, governance, and then improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And also it outlines the areas which we need to consider in terms of planning and identifying risks in respect of the value for money work, and how we respond and report to the risks within the document. It also provides a comparison between responsibilities under the 2015 code and the changes to those responsibilities under the 2020 code, including the differences between the previous criteria of informed decision-making, sustainable resource deployment, and working with partners and other third parties. And it also, and within that, it provides a summary of the sub-criteria under the new areas which we'll be needing to consider. So it is there for information. It provides you with an outline of some of our extended responsibilities, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or observations from anybody? Yes, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. A question for the auditors, really. The Redmond Review suggested that the opinion now from the external auditors would take a narrative form in the future, and I was just curious to know how long, what sort of document should we expect that narrative to be?
Well, so that's I hadn't moved on to that next document, but happy to answer that question. So there has been within the reports that we give in other areas, particularly on public interest entities, there is more setting out of the risks which auditors considers and in planning their audit, and then within the actual audit opinion itself, providing more detailed on the procedures which an auditor would have undertaken in response to those risks, so that the reader of the opinion has a more full understanding of the procedures that the auditor has undertaken, the considerations that they've made, and the conclusions which they've reached in order to give an opinion on whether the financial statements present a true and fair view. Within the public sector context, a lot of that information would already be included in terms of how we report to local authorities, would already be included within our audit results report. So before we issue our opinion, you would have received a report from us which outlines, what our risks are, how we address those risks, and what our conclusions were. But there's proposals that is also included within the audit opinion. So somebody reading your financial statements would see that in more detail in the opinion, which accompanies your financial statements. So that's part of the proposals, and that would bring it in line with the opinions that are prepared on the corporate side for public interest entities.
Any other questions or observations? It's unfortunately the Redmond Review, we've got no choice. We're going to have to accept an increase in fees in the future, but I'm sure Nigel will do an excellent job for us in reducing those to as little as possible. And I just wondered if we had any idea of what will our share be of the 15 million which has been put aside certainly for the first year, and is there any indication that assistance is going to continue in future years? Does anybody know anything about those?
I've just seen the details of what's been proposed for now. Haven't seen any information in respect of future years. Don't know whether Nigel has any further information.
No, I've as far as I'm aware, the government funding will be available for the current year, 21-22. In terms of what Calderdale might get, I haven't seen actually any information released about allocations. If we go on Calderdale's normal share of the pots, if you like, out of 15 million, I'd say somewhere between 40 and 50,000 potentially. But that's an estimate not based on any fact other than normally we try to assume that we work on the basis of something like 0.3% of the national share of most funding allocations. So it suggests something like 40 to 50,000. And I think, as you pointed out, Chair, I'm quite happy to have further discussions with Hassan about kind of the fee levels for last year and future years.
Right, thank you. Any other questions or observations? Right. So if we're happy to accept this report from Sam, everybody okay with that?
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Sam, sorry.
Just said thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it's unusual for me to say I'm happy to pay you extra money, but I've got no choice. All right, so we move on to the final item, the Audit Committee work plan. Are there any comments or observations on this? Are you all happy to accept it going forward?
Can I just point out, I've added the annual governance statement and the financial accounts on twice. You don't have to listen to them twice. It's an error. They're only going to be presented once. I also just want to make members aware, I was going to mention as part of item 13, there are 2 SIPFA webinars for audit committee members and general members, which I will circulate to members after the meeting. One of them is about knowledge and skills of audit committee members, and the other one's about a guide to understanding council's financial reporting requirements. So I will circulate that on to members. If you want to let me know if you want to book onto that, and I can make arrangements for it.
Right, thanks, Lisa. Hassan, did you put your hand up? Did you want to?
It was, don't know if it's the right place to mention it now, but it was just to, for your information that so as the partner in charge, we normally have under the PSA contract, there's a 5-year period. So my 5-year period ended for 1920, but there's a proposal to extend that for a further 2 years, which is in line with the PSA's guidance. So just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention that my period is going to be extended for another 2 years as as the engagement lead for the external audit.
Yeah, I think we have been informed of that. I think Nigel, certainly somebody informed. So thanks very much for that. And
Thank you.
We'll gladly put up with you for another couple of years or so. All right, so if everybody's okay to approve that work plan, nobody against that. Okay, so thank you very much for attending this evening, and everybody who's taken part in it. And special thanks, of course, to our officers. As I've said earlier, I think our finance team is a fantastic team. So thank you to all the staff involved in that, and business support. Janet, I won't leave you out. Okay, so thanks very much, and good night, everybody, and see you soon.